On the night of their arranged marriage, 19-year-old Clara Whitmore expected fear, not kindness. As thunder shook the mountains, her new husband, a feared Comanche warrior named Tawa, quietly said, "Come on, get face down." Convinced the worst was about to happen, Clara's heart pounded. But seconds later, arrows pierced the cabin walls. Tawa had sensed an ambush. His command wasn't about control, it was the only thing that saved her life. As flames surrounded their home, Clara realized the man everyone called a savage had just risked everything to protect her. But who wanted them both dead, and why? The wind howled across the endless prairie as Clara Whitmore gripped the edge of the stagecoach seat. Dust swirled against the small window, blurring the distant mountains into dark blue shadows. She had traveled nearly 2,000 miles from Boston, leaving behind the only life she had ever known. At 19 years old, Clara had nothing left to lose. After her parents died from influenza, she worked long hours in a textile mill where every day felt exactly the same. The wages barely kept food on the table, and winter had been especially cruel. When she answered an advertisement seeking women willing to build new lives in the Western Territories, she imagined a quiet ranch, a hard-working husband, and perhaps a chance to start over. No one had told her the truth. The stagecoach finally stopped outside a rough frontier trading post surrounded by wagons, horses, and weathered wooden buildings. Men unloaded supplies while children chased each other through the dust. Clara stepped onto the ground, clutching her single suitcase. A heavy silence settled over the crowd. People stared. Some looked sympathetic. Others looked frightened. An elderly woman approached her slowly. "You must be Miss Whitmore." Clara nodded. "I'm Martha Green." The older woman's smile faded almost immediately. "I suppose no one explained who came for you." Clara frowned. "My future husband owns a ranch, doesn't he?" Martha hesitated. "He owns no ranch." Clara felt her stomach tighten. "Then, where is he?" Instead of answering, Martha glanced toward the hills beyond the settlement. Hoofbeats echoed through the valley. Every conversation stopped. Merchants lowered their voices. Children hurried inside nearby buildings. A group of horsemen emerged from the dusty trail, riding with quiet confidence. Their horses moved as if they were part of the riders themselves. At their head rode a tall Comanche warrior. His long dark hair was tied behind his shoulders. A faded blue blanket rested across one side of his horse, while an eagle feather caught the afternoon breeze. Unlike the frightening stories Clara had heard growing up, he carried himself with calm dignity rather than menace. Still, fear tightened her chest. People stepped aside as he dismounted. The warrior spoke briefly with the trading post owner before turning toward Clara. His expression remained unreadable. Martha whispered, "His name is Tawa." Clara's heart nearly stopped. This is a mistake." No one answered. The marriage arrangement had already been signed weeks earlier. Tawa walked forward slowly, keeping several feet between them. He removed a small leather pouch from his belt and handed it to Martha instead of directly to Clara, a gesture of courtesy she did not yet understand. Inside lay the marriage papers and the payment promised to the agency that had arranged the match. Everything was legal. Everything was final. Clara wanted to run. Instead, she stood frozen. Tawa spoke in careful English. "Long journey." She nodded without speaking. "You hungry?" Another nod. His voice was steady and respectful. "Food first." Those two simple words surprised her. There were no demands. No threats. Only concern that she had traveled for days without a proper meal. Later that afternoon, the local minister performed a brief ceremony attended by only a handful of witnesses. The exchange of vows lasted less than 10 minutes. When it was over, Clara realized she was married to a man she barely knew. The ride to his cabin was almost silent. The sun dipped behind distant cliffs, painting the sky with shades of crimson and gold. Herds of wild horses grazed across open fields while hawks circled high above. Tawa occasionally pointed toward rivers, valleys, or mountain peaks, quietly telling her their Comanche names. Clara listened but said very little. She was too overwhelmed. By nightfall they reached a sturdy log cabin nestled beside a narrow stream. Smoke curled gently from the stone chimney, and horses grazed nearby behind a wooden fence. The place looked surprisingly peaceful. Inside, the cabin was simple but neat. Fresh blankets rested on a handmade bed. Shelves held dried herbs, pottery, and carefully folded clothing. Someone had clearly prepared for her arrival. Tawa placed her suitcase near the bed. "You safe here?" he said. Clara looked around uncertainly. This was not the savage wilderness she had imagined. Still, she could not quiet the stories that had filled her mind since childhood. Outside, thunder rumbled across the mountains. The wind grew stronger. Tawa paused near the doorway, listening. His expression changed. For the first time all day, his eyes sharpened with concern. He slowly extinguished the lantern. The cabin fell into darkness. Clara's pulse raced. Had she been wrong to trust him? Then Tawa looked toward the window, as though hearing something beyond the storm. He spoke in a low, urgent voice. "Come on, get face down." Confused but frightened by the sudden change in his tone, Clara dropped to the wooden floor just as a sharp whistle sliced through the night. An arrow exploded through the cabin window. Then another. And another. Someone outside had come to kill them. The first arrow shattered the window with a deafening crack. Glass sprayed across the wooden floor where Clara had been standing only a heartbeat earlier. She covered her head as another arrow buried itself deep into a support beam. Outside, horses screamed. Someone shouted. Then came the unmistakable roar of gunfire. Clara's heart pounded so hard she could barely breathe. Tawa was already moving. He grabbed a thick buffalo hide shield hanging near the door and crouched beside her. "Stay down," he said firmly. Another volley of arrows struck the cabin walls. One pierced the roof, sending splinters raining down. "Who's attacking us?" Clara whispered. Tawa listened instead of answering. His eyes narrowed. "Not my people." He lifted the edge of the hide shield and carefully looked through the broken window. Several mounted riders circled the cabin, carrying rifles and flaming torches. They wore bandanas across their faces, making it impossible to recognize them. Outlaws. They had planned this attack. A bottle filled with burning oil crashed against the outside wall. Flames spread quickly across the dry logs. Smoke drifted into the room. Clara coughed. The cabin was becoming a trap. Tawa turned to her. "We leave. Stay behind me." Before she could reply, he kicked open the back door. Cold night air rushed inside. He scanned the darkness for only a second before guiding Clara outside. They sprinted toward a cluster of large boulders near the creek. A rifle cracked. The bullet struck the ground behind them, throwing dirt into the air. Another shot followed. Tawa pushed Clara behind the rocks just before a third bullet struck the stone inches from his shoulder. "Don't move," he ordered. Clara nodded, trembling. From their hiding place she could see the cabin burning brighter with every passing second. The attackers laughed as flames climbed toward the roof. "They think we're still inside," Tawa said quietly. He studied the riders one by one. "There are 8. You can count them in the dark. They expect fear." His calm voice surprised her almost as much as his confidence. Instead of rushing into battle, he waited. Watching. Planning. One outlaw dismounted and walked toward the burning cabin. Another headed for the horse corral. "They want the horses," Tawa whispered. Clara frowned. The attack wasn't only about killing you? He shook his head. Good horses bring money. Everything suddenly made sense. The fire. The confusion. The stolen horses. This had been carefully organized. Tawa picked up a smooth stone and threw it into the darkness far to their left. The sound echoed through the trees. Immediately, two outlaws turned their rifles toward the noise. They fired several shots. At empty shadows. While they searched the wrong direction, Tawa slipped silently toward the horse corral. Clara watched in amazement. He moved almost without making a sound. Within moments, he cut the rope holding the gate closed. The frightened horses burst free. Dozens of powerful animals thundered across the valley. The outlaws shouted in panic. Catch them! My horse! They're getting away! Their attack instantly fell apart. Some riders chased the escaping herd while others remained near the burning cabin, unsure what to do. The confusion gave Tawa exactly the opening he needed. He returned to Clara's hiding place. We go. They hurried through the trees, using the darkness as cover. For nearly half a mile they followed the creek until they reached a narrow canyon. Only then did they stop. Clara leaned against a rock, exhausted. Our home. She whispered. It's gone. Tawa looked back toward the distant flames. A house can be built again. His answer was simple. Matter of fact. Yet there was sadness in his eyes. Everything he owned had been inside. Tools. Clothing. Family keepsakes. Still, he seemed far more concerned about Clara than himself. You hurt? She slowly shook her head. No. He gave a small nod of relief. For several minutes neither of them spoke. The only sounds were the rushing creek and the distant crackling of the fire. Finally Clara broke the silence. I thought. She hesitated. What? I thought when you told me to get face down. She admitted quietly, I was afraid of you. Tawa didn't seem offended. Instead, he stared into the darkness. My father once told me something. She waited. He said fear grows where people do not know each other. Clara lowered her eyes. She remembered every frightening story she had heard back east. Stories that painted every Comanche warrior as cruel and merciless. None of them matched the man sitting beside her. This man had risked his own life to save hers. Without him, she would have died in that cabin. I'm sorry, she whispered. For judging you. Tawa offered a faint smile. Now we know. Before Clara could answer, he suddenly became alert again. His head tilted slightly. He had heard something. Hoofbeats. Slow. Careful. Someone was tracking them through the canyon. Tawa stood and quietly reached for his bow. Behind me, he said. The moon emerged from the clouds, revealing 3 riders approaching through the narrow pass. But these men were different. They wore no masks. Each carried the mark of the same outlaw gang that had attacked the cabin. Their leader smiled coldly. There you are, he called. We've been looking for you. Clara realized with horror that escaping the fire had only begun their fight for survival. The outlaw leader slowly guided his horse into the narrow canyon, a cruel smile spreading across his face. There they are, he called to the others. Don't let them escape again. Clara's pulse quickened. Behind her, steep rock walls left only one narrow path forward. There was nowhere to run. Tawa stood between Clara and the 3 armed riders, his bow already drawn. His eyes remained calm, measuring every movement the outlaws made. The leader laughed. 1 man against 3? You should have stayed in that burning cabin. Without answering, Tawa released an arrow. It sliced through the cool night air and struck the outlaw's rifle, knocking it from his hands before he could fire. The startled horse reared, throwing its rider to the ground. The other two outlaws fired their rifles. Boom! Boom! Bullets slammed into the canyon walls, sending shards of rock flying. "Move!" Tawa shouted. He grabbed Clara's hand and led her through a narrow gap hidden between two towering boulders. The passage was so tight the horses couldn't follow. The outlaws cursed behind them. "They're getting away." Clara stumbled over loose stones, struggling to keep pace. "How do you know where you're going?" she gasped. "My grandfather showed me these trails." The passage opened into a dense forest filled with towering pine trees. Moonlight filtered through the branches, casting silver patterns across the ground. Only when they had put a safe distance between themselves and the canyon did Tawa finally slow. "We rest here." Clara leaned against a fallen log, breathing heavily. For the first time since arriving in the West, she noticed how quiet the wilderness could be. No factory whistles. No crowded streets. Only the whisper of the wind through the trees. Tawa disappeared briefly into the darkness. A few minutes later he returned carrying fresh water in a small leather pouch and several wild berries. "You should eat." Clara accepted them gratefully. "You haven't eaten either." He smiled faintly. "I will." As dawn broke, sunlight spilled across the mountains, revealing endless forests stretching towards the horizon. They continued traveling north until smoke rose from a distant valley. A Comanche village rested beside a winding river. Children played near the water while women prepared food over cooking fires. Warriors repaired saddles and cared for their horses. Everyone paused as Tawa and Clara entered the camp. Curious eyes followed the young woman from the east. Some smiled politely. Others seemed uncertain. An elderly woman stepped forward. She embraced Tawa warmly before looking at Clara. "This is Ayana," Tawa explained. "She is my aunt." Ayana studied Clara for a long moment before offering a gentle smile. "You are welcome here." Those simple words eased some of Clara's fear. Over the following days, life became something entirely different from what she had imagined. Each morning began before sunrise. The village woke with the sound of birds rather than church bells. Women taught Clara how to grind corn, prepare meals, and gather medicinal herbs. The children laughed whenever she struggled to pronounce Comanche words. Instead of mocking her, they patiently corrected her. Slowly, she learned. Tawa rarely spoke unless necessary, but he always seemed nearby whenever she needed help. One afternoon he invited her to the horse pasture. "You ride?" Clara laughed nervously. "Only once." He introduced her to a gentle brown mare named Willow. "She is patient. So I hope." Her first attempt ended with her sliding awkwardly back to the ground. Several children burst into laughter. Even Tawa smiled. Embarrassed, Clara brushed the dust from her dress. "I suppose that wasn't very graceful." "You got back up," Tawa replied. "That matters more." His words stayed with her. Every day she improved a little. Within 2 weeks she could guide Willow along the river without fear. One evening Clara watched the sunset beside Tawa. The sky glowed orange and crimson across the valley. "It isn't what I expected," she admitted quietly. "What?" "Any of this." Tawa looked towards the distant hills. "What did you expect?" She hesitated. "I believe the stories." "What stories?" "That your people only wanted war." He remained silent for a moment. "My father told me stories too." "About settlers?" He nodded. "That they would take everything." Clara lowered her eyes. "In many places, they did." "Yes." The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable. It was honest. For the first time, they spoke not as strangers forced together by circumstance, but as two people trying to understand each other's worlds. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of a young scout racing into the village. His horse was covered in sweat. He spoke rapidly in Comanche. The smiles disappeared from every face. Warriors immediately gathered around the village chief. "What happened?" Clara whispered. Tawa's expression hardened. "The outlaws." He looked towards the eastern hills. "They have returned." The scout pointed towards the distant horizon where thin columns of smoke rose into the evening sky. "They've attacked another settlement," Tawa said quietly. Then he turned to Clara. "This time. They're coming here." The peaceful days were over. The battle for the valley had begun. The village gathered in silence as the young scout finished delivering his report. Smoke still rose from the eastern hills. The outlaw gang had raided another frontier settlement before sunrise, stealing horses, wagons, food supplies, and leaving several families homeless. Survivors claimed the attackers seemed to know exactly where every valuable item was hidden. "They had help," Tawa said quietly. The village chief nodded. "They knew too much." Clara stood beside Ayanna, watching the worried faces around the council fire. Only a few weeks earlier, she would have been terrified simply standing among Comanche warriors. Now she saw something entirely different. They were protecting their families. Just like anyone else. Tawa knelt beside the chief and traced a rough map in the dirt with a stick. "They attacked here." He marked another point. "Then here." Finally, he circled the trading post where Clara had first arrived. "They're moving closer." One of the older warriors frowned. "They're searching for something." "No," Tawa replied. "They're searching for someone." A heavy silence followed. The chief looked toward Tawa. "You." Later that afternoon, Clara helped Ayanna gather herbs along the riverbank. The older woman noticed her troubled expression. "You are thinking." Clara smiled weakly. "Is it that obvious?" Ayanna laughed softly. "You worry for Tawa." Clara hesitated before answering. "Yes." Ayanna carefully tied bundles of sage together. "He has carried many burdens since he was young." "What happened to his family?" Ayanna looked across the river. "Years ago, raiders attacked our winter camp." She paused. "Tawa lost both his parents that day." Clara's heart sank. "He survived because he protected his younger brother." "What happened to him?" Ayanna lowered her eyes. "No one knows." The boy had disappeared during the attack. For years, Tawa had searched every nearby settlement without success. Clara finally understood the sadness she often saw behind his calm expression. That evening, Tawa prepared to ride out with several scouts. "I'll be back before sunrise," he told Clara. "Please be careful." "I always try." As he mounted his horse, Clara noticed something tied beneath the saddle. A folded piece of paper. Curious, she waited until he disappeared into the darkness before remembering where she had seen the same paper. At the trading post. Hidden inside the office of Mr. Briggs, the man who had arranged her marriage. A chill ran through her. Could it be the same document? Unable to ignore her instincts, Clara quietly searched through the supplies left from the burned cabin. Inside a small leather pouch she discovered another folded map. It showed wagon routes, horse trails, and every nearby Comanche village. Someone had carefully marked each location with black ink. Whoever created the map knew the territory remarkably well. Too well. Then Clara noticed something even more disturbing. A small symbol drawn in one corner. She recognized it immediately. It was stamped on the crates she had seen stacked behind Mr. Briggs' trading post. Her hands trembled. "The trading post." She whispered. They've been helping the outlaws. Before dawn, Tawa and the scouts returned. Their expressions confirmed the news was bad. We found another abandoned ranch, one scout reported. The attackers left nothing behind. Clara stepped forward. I think I know who's helping them. Every eye turned toward her. She carefully unfolded the map. I found this. Tawa studied it closely. Where? In your saddlebag. I've never seen it before. She pointed toward the small symbol. I saw this mark at the trading post. The owner? Mr. Briggs. The chief's face darkened. He has traded with us for years. Maybe that's why no one suspected him, Clara answered. Tawa looked thoughtful. If Briggs is working with the outlaws, he knows where every village is. And every wagon carrying supplies. Everything suddenly fit together. The attacks. The stolen horses. The carefully planned ambushes. Someone inside the settlements had been feeding information to the outlaw gang. That afternoon, Tawa chose 4 trusted warriors. We ride to the trading post tonight. Clara stepped forward. I'm coming. Tawa immediately shook his head. It's dangerous. So was crossing the country alone. He couldn't argue with that. You know Briggs, Clara continued. He'll recognize me. You could distract him. Exactly. After a long silence, Tawa finally nodded. But you stay beside me. I promise. As darkness covered the valley, 5 riders quietly approached the trading post. Everything looked peaceful. Lanterns glowed in the windows. Wagons stood neatly outside. Yet something felt wrong. The place was far too quiet. Clara noticed the stable doors standing open. No horses. No workers. No guards. They knew we were coming, she whispered. Before anyone could react, dozens of rifle barrels appeared from behind wagons, fences, and rooftops. The outlaw leader stepped into the lantern light, smiling confidently. Standing beside him was Mr. Briggs. The trader removed his hat and looked directly at Clara. I wondered how long it would take you to discover the truth, he said with a cold smile. Tawa slowly reached for his bow. But they were completely surrounded. And this time, there was no easy escape. The trading post courtyard fell silent. More than 20 armed outlaws surrounded Tawa, Clara, and the 4 Comanche warriors. Lantern light flickered across rifles and revolvers, casting long shadows over the dusty ground. Mr. Briggs stepped forward with a smug smile. You should have stayed in the mountains, he said. Now you've walked right into my trap. Clara stared at the man who had arranged her marriage. You sold me here just to lure Tawa out, didn't you? Briggs didn't deny it. You were never the prize, Miss Whitmore. He pointed toward Tawa. He is. The outlaw leader chuckled. The government is paying well for anyone who clears these lands. Once the Comanche are gone, ranchers and railroads will pay us even more. Tawa's face remained calm, but his eyes burned with determination. You will not take our home. Briggs laughed. I already have. He raised his hand. Take them. The outlaws rushed forward. A rifle fired. The shot echoed across the valley. Before the attackers reached them, Tawa gave a sharp whistle. From the darkness beyond the trading post came an answering cry. Then the thunder of dozens of horses. Comanche warriors burst from the trees, surrounding the settlement from every direction. They had quietly followed Tawa, expecting a trap. The outlaws froze in shock. What? Briggs gasped. You thought I came alone? Tawa said. The battle erupted. Gunfire cracked through the night while horses charged between wagons. Warriors used the buildings for cover as the outlaws fired wildly. Clara hurried frightened families into the safety of a nearby storehouse. "Stay inside," she shouted. A terrified little boy clung to her arm. "My father's still outside." "I'll bring him back," Clara promised. She stepped into the chaos once more. Across the square, Tawa fought with remarkable skill, disarming 2 attackers without unnecessary violence. He defended his people while trying to avoid harming innocent townsfolk caught in the crossfire. Suddenly, Clara spotted Briggs slipping away through the stables with a burning torch. He wasn't escaping. He was heading towards the wagon yard. Barrels of lamp oil stood stacked beside the buildings. "If he lights those," she whispered, "the entire settlement would burn." Clara ran after him. "Briggs!" He turned in surprise. "You should have stayed hidden." He threw the torch towards the oil barrels. Without thinking, Clara lunged forward. She caught the burning torch before it reached the barrels, but the impact knocked her to the ground. The flames scorched her sleeve. She quickly smothered the fire in the dirt. Briggs reached for his revolver. Before he could fire, Tawa appeared. "Leave her." Briggs aimed at Tawa instead. "You've already lost." "No," Tawa replied calmly. "You have." Briggs pulled the trigger. Click. His revolver was empty. In his panic, he hadn't realized he'd fired every round. Tawa stepped forward and knocked the weapon from his hand. The traitor stumbled backwards and fell into the mud. Sheriff Daniel Harper, who had gathered several deputies after hearing the gunfire, arrived at that very moment. "Drop your weapons," the sheriff shouted. Seeing the battle was lost, the remaining outlaws surrendered one by one. The outlaw leader tried to flee on horseback, but Comanche riders blocked every exit. Within minutes, the fighting was over. As dawn broke over the valley, smoke drifted harmlessly into the morning sky. The settlement still stood. The sheriff examined the maps, letters, and payment records recovered from Briggs' office. "This is enough to convict every one of them," he said. "The attacks were planned for months." Briggs lowered his head in defeat. His greed had destroyed lives on both sides of the frontier. Later that morning, settlers and Comanche families worked together repairing damaged fences and caring for the injured. For the first time, Clara saw both communities standing side by side instead of facing one another. The elderly minister who had married Clara and Tawa weeks earlier approached them with a warm smile. "I've waited a long time to see a day like this." "So have we," Clara answered. The village chief stepped forward before everyone gathered in the square. He looked at Clara with pride. "You crossed 2 worlds." Clara looked confused. "I only did what anyone should." The chief smiled. "No. You chose trust when fear would have been easier." He placed a beautifully crafted beadwork necklace in her hands. It belonged to Tawa's mother. Tawa looked surprised. "It should stay in the family," the chief said. Clara's eyes filled with tears as she accepted the gift. She turned to Tawa. "When I first met you, I believed every story I'd ever been told. And now? Now I know the truth." Tawa smiled. "The truth is stronger than fear." As the sun rose above the mountains, the people of the settlement and the Comanche village began rebuilding together. The battle had ended. But something far greater had begun, a future built not on suspicion, but on courage, respect, and understanding. Neither Clara nor Tawa realized that their greatest adventure was no longer surviving the past. It was building a new future together. The first rays of sunlight spread across the valley, bathing the mountains in shades of gold. Smoke no longer rose from burning homes. Instead, the sounds of hammers, wagons, and children laughing echoed through the settlement. The battle was over. For the first time in many years, the Comanche village and the frontier settlement worked side by side instead of living in fear of one another. Men repaired fences together. Women prepared meals for anyone who was hungry. Children, who had once been taught to fear each other, played beside the river without caring who came from which side of the valley. Clara watched it all with quiet amazement. Only a few weeks earlier she had arrived believing she was entering a life filled with danger and loneliness. Now she stood among people who had become her family. Tawa walked beside her carrying fresh timber toward a damaged barn. "We did not win because we fought," he said. "We won because people finally saw the truth." Clara smiled. "I think your father would be proud." Tawa looked toward the mountains. "I hope so." A few days later Sheriff Daniel Harper returned with several federal marshals. Briggs and the surviving members of the outlaw gang were taken away in chains to stand trial for murder, robbery, arson, and conspiracy. Before leaving, Briggs looked once toward Clara. "I gave you a chance at an easy life." Clara calmly shook her head. "No. You tried to use me." She stepped closer. "I found something far more valuable than the life you promised." Without another word, the marshals led Briggs away forever. Weeks passed. Spring slowly covered the valley with wildflowers. Together, settlers and Comanche families rebuilt the burned cabin where Tawa and Clara had spent their first night. This time everyone helped. The cabin became larger than before. A strong stone chimney replaced the old wooden one. Wide windows overlooked the river. When the final roof beam was lifted into place, the entire village gathered for a celebration. Music filled the evening air. Children danced around a large bonfire while elders shared stories beneath the stars. The village chief stood before everyone. "Today," he announced, "we celebrate more than a new home." He looked toward Clara and Tawa. "We celebrate hope." He invited Clara to stand beside him. Months earlier she had arrived as a frightened stranger. Now she was welcomed as part of the community. The chief carefully placed a beautifully woven blanket over her shoulders. "This is a sign that you will always have a home among us." Clara's eyes filled with tears. "I don't know how to thank you." "You already have," Ayana said warmly. "You chose kindness when fear would have been easier." That summer Clara opened a small school near the edge of the valley. Settler children and Comanche children learned together beneath the shade of tall cottonwood trees. She taught reading, writing, arithmetic, and geography. In return, the elders taught tracking, herbal medicine, history, and the Comanche language. The children laughed whenever Clara accidentally mispronounced a new word. Even Tawa smiled as she practiced each evening. "You are improving," he teased. "I hope so," she laughed. "Your language isn't easy." "Neither is yours." For the first time, laughter came naturally between them. Their marriage had not been built on grand promises. It had been built one day at a time, through patience, honesty, and trust. One crisp autumn afternoon, Clara stood on a hill overlooking the valley. Golden leaves drifted through the cool breeze. She watched families harvesting crops together while horses grazed peacefully below. Tawa joined her. "You miss Boston?" She thought carefully before answering. "I miss the memories." He nodded. "But not the life." "No." She slipped her hand into his. "This is my home now." He smiled. "Our home." Together they looked across the valley they had fought to protect. A place once divided by fear had become a place united by understanding. Many years later, the story of the brave Comanche warrior and the young mail-order bride became a favorite tale throughout the frontier. Travelers spoke of the valley where former enemies built lasting peace. Children grew into adults without inheriting the hatred that had once divided their parents. On warm evenings, Clara often sat on the porch of the rebuilt cabin with her grandchildren gathered around her feet. One curious little boy asked, "Grandmother, were you scared when you first met grandfather?" She laughed softly. "I was terrified." "What changed?" Clara looked toward Tawa, who was repairing a saddle nearby with the same quiet patience she had admired from the very beginning. He gave me a reason to trust him. She smiled as he looked up and returned her smile. The first words I truly remember him saying were, "Come on, get face down." The children looked confused. "That doesn't sound very romantic," one little girl said. Clara laughed. "It wasn't meant to be. It was the warning that saved my life." She wrapped an arm around her granddaughter. Sometimes the moment we fear the most becomes the moment that changes everything. As the sun disappeared behind the mountains, Clara and Tawa watched another peaceful evening settle over the valley. The fires of hatred had long since faded. In their place stood friendship, family, and hope. And the story of how two strangers from different worlds found trust, respect, and lasting love would be remembered for generations to come. The end.